Welcome, viewers. We are here at the law office of the United States, one of top leading civil rights attorney, Sanford Rubenstein. He has been very kind and he has given us time to talk to us. So let's talk to him and hear right from him what he has to say regarding his law history and the current debate on so much going on, particularly on immigration. So let's talk to him.
Tell your viewers, it's something that's very important to the immigrant community to know. It doesn't matter if someone is a immigrant here in this country, documented or undocumented, if they're in an accident, are a victim of police brutality, suffer from medical malpractice, they have the same rights as anybody else does to bring an action and get damages for their pain and suffering. So if someone is here undocumented, that does not in any way, shape, or form prevent them from getting damages if they are a victim in an accident, of medical malpractice, or of police brutality.
Right. But primarily, you have been a civil rights attorney.
I've represented victims here in this city of police brutality for almost 40 years. For the last 20 years, I've done many important cases that have been in the news for immigrants. The case of Usman Zango, killed by the police in Chelsea, a $3 million award for his family for his wrongful death. And what immigrants need to know is they have the same rights as citizens when it comes to terrible tragedies in which someone is killed or horribly injured. One of the messages that I've been trying to send to the immigrant community, which is very important in the era of Trump, is it's very important to keep demonstrating. It's very important to keep taking to the streets. Because the truth of the matter is, those who protest, those who demonstrate, are like a dam holding back the flood of racism and totalitarianism in this country. Right. So I think the turnout we've seen in the streets of the immigrant community, along with good-meaning Americans, New Yorkers, is very positive because I believe it really makes a difference in terms of the policies that are set by our government when we have a strong force out there in the streets protesting and demonstrating those things which we believe are not right.
Right. I was reading your book, and there was this very interesting passage I came across, and I think these are your very own words. You said, "My hope and goal is to use power of our civil justice system to help create a safer and more equitable society for everyone." Explain that.
Well, first of all, what we have to understand is what government reacts to. So in many of the cases that I've represented victims, for example, of police brutality, these victims, when they get large awards, it demonstrates to the city that we need change in the way police interact with people. In addition, many times, there is a criminal component to a case. For example, in the Abdul Lawima police torture case, that's a case in which a young man was taken into a police station and sodomized in the bathroom of a police station. That police officer who did that to him, Justin Volpe, is spending 30 years in jail. That's the only way, I believe, we demonstrate that this is wrong and will not be accepted by our society. So what I'm saying is that because, and also Mr. Lawima got a total settlement award of almost $9 million. This demonstrates to the city that they got to change things so that these things don't happen. So by fighting in the civil justice system for victims for damages, what we're also fighting for is change. So what happens to one victim doesn't happen to another victim. Now, in addition to that, it's very important to hold those who commit wrongful criminal acts accountable. The other way we work to get change is by putting in jail, like we did Justin Volpe, the system, the federal government did, those police officers who believe they can, with impunity, do whatever they want to a person here in New York. And we work with the prosecutors, cooperating with prosecutors, to see to it that when there is a criminal act committed, for example, by a police officer, that criminal act is something that that police officer is held accountable for.
Right, nice. Also, in your book, it was a very interesting book, and for me, I've been a bookworm, but this book was something totally new for me because it opened up a new horizon for me.
Can I get a copy of the book and show it to you? It's a book that I wrote with a writer called The Outrageous Rubenstein, How a Media-Savvy Trial Lawyer Fights for Justice and Change. Right. And what this book talks about is many of the cases in which I've represented victims and the results of those cases, as well as my commitment to civil rights, because everyone in this country needs to be treated equally, whether they're an immigrant who just came here or someone that's been here for 10 generations. Exactly. We all, under our Constitution, are to be treated equally.
Right. Moving on to the next question. In New York, former Mayor Michael Bloomberg, he previously had been indicating that all matters involving civil rights, they should be decided by a judge and not by a jury. What does that mean?
That was a terrible proposal because it takes out of the people's hands the right to make a determination with regard to a case involving another citizen. We don't want a system in which we only have a judge making a decision. We want juries to make decisions because juries come from all walks of life. It's not just one person. And we don't want to leave it to a political system who appoints the judges to have only one person make decisions in cases. That's an attempt, actually, I believe, to try to reduce the amount of damages victims get when they're horribly injured through no fault of their own. Juries do the right thing, and in our system as it exists, you have the trial court, which is the Supreme Court of the state of New York, but then you have the court above that, the appeals court, called the appellate division. And if a jury awards what the appellate judges believe is too much money, they're going to reduce it. So we already have a check and balance in our system with regard to jury verdicts. And I've gotten some very high jury verdicts, $25 million, $22.9 million. In both of those cases, in one, the appellate division reduced the verdict. In the other, it was settled because we knew the appellate division was going to reduce the verdict. So there's a check and balance that already exists. That's a bad proposal, and it's only meant to reduce the damages victims are entitled to, so the city doesn't have to pay them.
Nice, right. Let's talk about, because given at your magnitude and your, the platform where you work, it's quite large. Let's talk about civil lawsuits as bringing some kind of a positive social change.
Well, the whole purpose of civil lawsuits is to make defendants who committed wrongful acts pay damages in the hope that will prevent them from doing it again. It's social engineering in our system, and it really does work, because the truth of the matter is we should have the right to receive damages if a loved one is killed wrongly and leaves behind 2 children, for example. Take the case of Sean Bell. I represented the family of Sean Bell, the mother of his 2 children. Well, here the man who was supposed to support their family was taken from us through no fault of his own. That family should get a settlement, or a jury should be given the opportunity to make an award to that family if their loved one was taken because of the wrongful acts of another. Our system works in that way, and that's very important, and that system needs to be kept in place. One of the concerns I have today is with this Republican attempt to do away with Obamacare. They will, in that bill, also try to limit victims' damages when they are a victim of medical malpractice by creating what's called caps, which are artificial limits, $250,000, for example, for pain and suffering for victims. So that would mean, in the case that I was able to get a $62 million verdict, and that was settled for less in the appellate division, for a victim who suffered medical malpractice, the jury came back and said, you did become the victim of medical malpractice, lost both her legs, and went blind, and not blind, deaf, and went deaf in one ear. she should only receive $250,000? That's not right. We are concerned, those of us in the trial bar, that part of the Obamacare replacement is going to be a law which will restrict damages to $250,000 for people who are victims of medical malpractice. That's also wrong. It doesn't achieve any benefit to anyone. It doesn't create better medical care. We're concerned with that, and we're watching very carefully.
You are currently a part of a team in a civil case representing victims of 9/11 who have sued various organizations, individuals, financial organizations for helping fund the 9/11 terrorists.
This case has been going on, believe it or not, for 15 years. In this case, we are attempting to tell those who fund terrorism that you will be as responsible financially for the damages committed by terrorists as well as the terrorists. So that if a bank, a charity, gives money to a terrorist organization, and that money is used to maim, kill people, damage property, they can be sued for damages that were incurred by those victims. That case is still in the federal courts. There was some question about the immunity of the Saudi government for that, and certain individuals were let out of the case because of what's called sovereign immunity. But that case is still going, and there was a recent decision favorable to the victims in that case. We're hoping to get a trial, and we're hoping to be able to prove to a jury that those organizations that we have sued funded terrorists, and we're going to set an example that if you fund terrorists, you will be responsible for the damages they do.
Right, nice. Let's go into the details because this is a very interesting case. But for our viewers, Sean Bell's case, how it can, the judgment, it can help prevent dangerous behavior.
Well, unfortunately, in that case, we saw our system, in the view of Nicole Bell, the mother of his two children, fail her. Because although a financial settlement was reached with the city of New York for money for her children and for the two victims who lived through this barrage of 50 shots, the criminal case in that tragedy resulted in an acquittal of the police officers. You see, in the state system, defendants have the right to what's called waived juries and have a judge make a decision. That's not true in the federal system. In the federal system, a prosecutor has to agree with a defense lawyer before a jury is waived. And that's one of the reasons why I believe it's very important. And that Sean Bell case, the detectives that were involved in that case were acquitted. They were found not guilty. So while Nicole Bell, on behalf of her children, Trent Benefield and Joe Guzman got settlements, financial settlements, they don't believe that justice was done on the criminal side for them. And while some justice was done on the civil side, full justice was not done. And that's why I have proposed that our civil rights statute be amended. Because right now, under our civil rights statute, the only time a family can recover for the wrongful death of a loved one because of acts of the police that a jury finds are negligent, reckless, is the crime of intentional acts. So, for example, in the Bell case, because the federal government did not believe it could prove that it was an intentional act on behalf of these detectives and police officers firing all these shots, killing Sean and wounding two of his friends, they didn't prosecute. They spent the year investigating. And I believe, just like in the Abner Louima case, in which the federal government did come in and prosecute, that it's a better system when the federal government comes in using the FBI as opposed to local district attorneys who need the police to make their cases and who use the local police as investigators, investigating their own members of the police force. We need independent investigations. That's also why Governor Cuomo, in his recent executive order, declaring that in all cases in which an unarmed individual in New York State is killed by a police officer, the Attorney General that's been given to these cases of police killing people wrongly and police brutality has resulted in change in New York City. Not only has it resulted in change in that we now have the Attorney General coming in investigating and prosecuting where appropriate these cases, but we also have the ability, because of a changed attitude and mentality, to have better training, to have new programs put in place so that police officers have more sensitivity to those in the immigrant community. That's because of the success that we've had in the anti-police brutality movement, both through demonstrations and getting high awards for the victims we represent. So that, again, our purpose is that we stop this from happening. I recently did a big press conference yesterday with a man who claims that he was wrongly convicted and wrongly sent to jail. We believe the facts are in our favor. However, we're going to put it to a jury. Let a jury decide. We have great rights in this country to have juries decide our disputes and ultimately to get the change that's necessary through litigation as well as through the streets and the demonstrations that have been taking place. They must continue. Demonstrators have to understand how important it is for them to go out there and express their views publicly in large groups, because the government really does listen.
At this point, I want to hear from you a little bit about your association with the Dream Team and Johnnie Cochran.
Johnnie Cochran, I believe, was one of the greatest lawyers who have ever lived in modern days in our country. I had the good fortune of working with him during the Abner Louima civil action, and as a result of that, we ended up representing victims in all parts of the country. And let me share some anecdotes with you about how smart Johnnie is, because he was a great strategist as well as a great lawyer. He was a great man. First of all, he understood the importance of always doing what's in the best interest of your client. And that's a philosophy that I've taken from him that I believe in also. And I believe all lawyers should. We should always do what's in the best interests of our clients. Understanding that, you got to understand what a great strategist Johnnie was. And let me give you an example. He and I were handling a case together involving the wrongful death of an elderly Caribbean woman who had 4 grown children when she was just driving a car and another car came from across the road, crashed into her on the wrong side of the street. It was a clear case, and she was killed. The woman who was driving the car happened to be a young college student, the other car. Very pretty, young college student. And now we're at a mediation trial. And the judge in the trial is hearing the evidence. And the young girl, who's obviously distraught by the fact that because she wasn't paying attention at that moment, her car crossed the double line, crashed into the Caribbean woman's car and killed her, she starts crying. And she puts her head on her mother's shoulder. And it's sad. I mean, she killed somebody and she's feeling bad about it. I say to myself, uh-oh, here goes all the sympathy that we had from this mediator arbitrator. It's gone. It's now going to shift. I look at Johnnie Cochran. Johnnie Cochran goes like one of those, don't worry. Okay. Summation. Johnnie Cochran. This young lady in times of trouble, in times when she feels that she needs a shoulder to lean on, she has her mother. These 4 people no longer have their mother. He was able to shift the sympathy from the girl to the 4 Caribbean children, grown adults of the woman who was killed. Another example, and this is how we as lawyers, and I've learned this over the years, really have to be quick on our feet and have the strategy to come up with whatever we have to deal with. And a perfect example was during the Abner Louima police torture case. The comment was made by Mr. Louima to the press that one of the police officers said to him while he was being tortured, "It's not Dinkins time anymore, it's now Giuliani time." And that was an inference to the fact that Giuliani was going to be tough on people, on particularly the minority community, and was a suggestion that Dinkins, who was the first black mayor in this city, was of a different mindset, and that he was too lenient perhaps and too laissez-faire. But the truth of the matter is, it wasn't a true statement. He had made it up because one of his relatives came to his bedside and said, "You need to get attention to the case Abner, make this up to get more attention." Well, people should not do that. Very important to tell the truth in our system. Well, Abner realized that, and he told the truth about what happened. And he said, "I made that up, it wasn't true." Press starts calling. Well, if it's not true, maybe everything's not true. Maybe the whole story's made up. How do you deal with it? Johnny happened to be out of the country at the time, and I was getting a barrage of phone calls. So I reached Johnny and said, "Johnny, what's your idea to handle this?" He says, "Oh, no problem. This is what you say. It doesn't matter whether that comment was made or not. What matters is that Abner Louima was a victim of police torture. He's still a victim." And that's the comment that I made, even though I got credit for it in the newspapers and on TV. It was Johnny who came up with that as a strategy to handle this. So you got to be quick on your feet, and you got to be able to come up with strategies. And Johnny was just brilliant at it. So not only was he a great lawyer, he was a brilliant strategist. And the other thing he taught me, which I already knew, but really emphasized the importance of, is when you're representing a victim, preparation of the case is almost as important as picking the jury or actually trying the case. Because you really need to prepare your case in advance. You need to get the expert witnesses that can prove what has to be proven lined up in advance. And you need to sit with your client and learn everything about that incident, whatever it was that caused them to suffer that injury, to be able to be the kind of trial lawyer that can present to the jury what needs to be presented.
A little bit about Osman Zongo. How, that was quite a case.
Usman Zongo.
How were you able to deal with that?
Usman Zongo was an African immigrant working over in Chelsea at a warehouse who was in the warehouse when police in civilian clothes raided the warehouse looking for counterfeit CDs. He saw them, he thought they were robbers themselves, their badges weren't out, and he got scared and he started to run away. Well, one of the police officers not only followed him, but shot and killed him, wrongly. We got a $3 million award from the city of New York for his wrongful death for his family in Burkina Faso. What's interesting about that case is, and I don't know how much of the public knows this, but I had agreed to return the body of Usman Zongo from the United States, from New York, to Burkina Faso. I'd never been to Burkina Faso, and I went with two members of the Burkina Faso community here in New York to return Usman Zongo's body. We had to stop in Paris because the trip to Burkina Faso requires a stopover. We land in Paris, we get on a plane, we go to Burkina Faso, and we're greeted by the, I think it was the foreign minister at the airport. And I'm talking to the foreign minister, I'm showing him photographs, explaining to him what happened. And one of the Burkina Fasosians who came with me is tapping me on the shoulder. And I'm saying, please stop tapping me on the shoulder. I'm talking to the prime minister here. No, I got to talk to you. I say, okay, what is it? The body is not here. It didn't come on the plane. It's lost. American Airlines lost the body, like a piece of luggage. People were sleeping in the streets waiting for the funeral that day. What to do? Well, the Prime Minister's office got on the phone with American Airlines, and the next day they found the body.
Oh.
So we were able to have a appropriate burial for him.
Right.
But that was a death that never should have occurred. It was a wrongful death. He had overstayed his visa, but it didn't matter. His family was entitled to damages for what happened to him, and $3 million, as I said, in damages were awarded for his wrongful death.
your role in assisting Reverend L. Sharpton.
For many years, I was the personal counsel to Reverend Al Sharpton. In fact, he said some very nice things about me in the book, in the foreword. He wrote the foreword. If I can find it here, I'll tell you some of the things he said. Well, you know what? Let's let everybody read the book. This foreword by Reverend Al Sharpton. But he said some nice things about me and my work in civil rights. And I also represented him in a very interesting case for damages as a result of being stabbed in a rally in Bensonhurst protesting the killing of Yusuf Hawkins. We're going way back now, a number of years ago. But basically what happened there was Reverend Sharpton was leading demonstrations because a young black man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, did nothing wrong, was killed as a result of being in a neighborhood in which there were racist and bigoted people who were concerned with blacks being in that neighborhood. And he died. The protests over that were very, very serious, and threats were made to Reverend Sharpton's life. Well, he had been promised by the mayoral office of Mayor Dinkins, who was mayor at the time, that he'd be kept safe. Well, what happened was a man got through the zone of cops who were guarding Sharpton doing the rally and stabbed him in the chest. There are a lot of legal requirements when the police don't do their job to be able to collect damages. Well, in fact, his case, his stabbing, fit all those requirements. There was a promise by him, by the Dinkins administration, to watch out for his safety. All the elements required were there. Well, the case happened to have been marked off calendar by lawyers that had it. And then he asked me to pick it up and see what I could do. Well, I got the case restored to the court, and we go for the trial. We're about to pick a jury in the case. And the lawyer for the city finally offered the amount that we wanted to resolve the case. And it was settled for a fair six-figure number for the damages for his stabbing. But that's an example how the system also works. Because here, when the city promised him that he'd be okay, don't worry about it, we'll watch out for you, and he was stabbed because someone got into that zone where no one was supposed to be, that is actionable, and we were successful in recovering damages for him. And I was marching in many cases, going way back to Amadou Diallo, in the front lines with Reverend Sharpton against police brutality and the wrongful whole policy of stop and frisk, which I believe was stopped because of the outright demonstrations and public outcry against it.
Right. New York Post referred to you as the outrageous Rubenstein.
You know, it's interesting because there was an editorial in the New York Post in which they were criticizing me as Sharpton's lawyer, and I forgot what the case was all about. It was a case in which I was defending Rubenstein, and they said something like, the only one more outrageous than Sharpton is his lawyer, the outrageous Rubenstein. Well, I turned that around, and I used that as a title for my book because I saw it as a badge of courage, going up against municipalities, big corporations, on behalf of the little guy. And that's what we do here. We represent victims. We don't care whether it's the city of New York, the New York City Police Department, the New York City Fire Department, Walmart, any big corporate entity. If they are responsible for either a wrongful death or injuries to someone, we will go to court and fight for damages for the victim. Whether that victim is a 10th generation American or an immigrant here who's overstayed his visa, it just doesn't matter. We will fight for that victim, and we, again, want all of your viewers to understand, even if you're an undocumented immigrant, you have the same rights as American citizens when it comes to damages if you've been wrongly treated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubenstein.
My pleasure. Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Let's do it again.